Hello, my name is Chris Widden from Dalhousie University. I'm going to talk to you today about some of our research work using deep learning to try to predict the positions of drifters in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. This project was originally designed by postdoctoral fellow Uriel. However, it was completed by Master of Applied Computer Science students Aditya Jain and Rashida Kodial in collaboration with myself and with Gregory Sutherland from Environment and Climate Change Canada. The tracer release experiment by MEOPAR and RQM in the Gulf of St. Lawrence released hundreds of small drifters floating along the water that then moved over time, recording their position every several minutes or hourly. The goal of this work is to try to predict where things will move, for example, pollution, oil spills, algae blooms, or boats that are drifting and need to be helped with search and rescue. Why do we want to apply deep learning for this problem? Well, deep learning has been shown to be used in a wide variety of applications, but there have been very few studies applying it to pollution dispersion. There are many numerical models that are used for these sorts of problems, and our questions were, could deep learning potentially be quicker than numerical models, or provide better accuracy in areas where the physics is poorly understood? So this is more of a feasibility study, seeing can deep learning be used to try to predict the location of something after you've observed where it's been previously. We did this work in two phases, both again applied by Master of Applied Computer Science students. In the first, we used standard machine learning models like linear regression, support vector machines, random forests, and XGBoost. In the second phase, we applied a simple deep neural network called long short-term memory machines, LSTM. How do you apply machine learning to a project like this? First, you need to collect the data. Then, a lot of the work is actually in looking at the data, cleaning the data, processing the data to make it in a format needed by these machine learning models. As an example, in this data, each of the drifter positions had an @sea variable, which recorded whether the drifter was indeed at sea, or for example, was still on the boat, or the first few timestamps after it was placed in the water, but the positioning for the GPS recorder probably wasn't working quite yet. So we had to filter out all of that data that wasn't actually useful. We chose to first start by looking at the hourly positions, looking at the previous 3-hour positions to predict the next position after that. We set the data up where the first 80% of the data was used from each drifter for training purposes, and we predicted the position of that drifter in the latter 20%. Now, we had longitude and latitude positions from GPS recorders, but because of curvature, this data is a bit hard to use, so we projected it down to a 2D plane of x and y coordinates. After that, we had to implement the models and apply them using toolkits like scikit-learn in the Python programming language. And then most of the remainder of the work was in optimizing the work. It's very rare that a first stab at machine learning is going to give you good results, and we saw that here, as I'll talk about in a minute. We had to evaluate where we were going wrong, look at common errors, and do things like add new data features like velocity, moving average, what type of drifter we were applying, because some drifters are heavier or lighter than others, and so on. In this project, we didn't really get towards a production phase, so all the work was done in so-called Jupyter notebooks, which are a mix of notebook code and text, where you can run each line step by step and modify it as you're going. To use this in future work, then we would need to modify these to be production code. Our first lesson from this is that predicting absolute position is really hard. As I said, we reduced these to x and y coordinates. We had 3 hourly positions and predicted where is it going in the future. With this, if you think about a term like accuracy, then actually something like 99% accuracy is very misleading because we have a large coordinate space and then saying we are at this position and we were previously here, you might have a small absolute error, but a very large error in terms of what we care about, which is what is the direction, where were we before, and where are we going. And so at our first step of this, we were taking those hard positions and predicting another absolute position and getting terrible results. So support vector machines, we had the general trend, but the actual position was very off, where red is the actual positions, and black is the predictions. Linear regression and other simple models worked quite well, but you can see there was still a bit of a lag, and so they were not predicting the direction appropriately. So what did we do? We added other features. We added in velocity, we added in a moving average, and then we got really good results. You can see this linear regression plot for one drifter predicted the track very well. Then we expanded into looking at longer-term predictions, looking out at 1-hour predictions, 2 hours, 4 hours, and 12-hour predictions in the future, taking the previous 3 positions along the same range. So for the 1-hour prediction, we took the previous 1, 2, and 3 hours. For 2-hour prediction, we're looking at the previous 2, 4, and 6 hours, and so on. Linear regression performed the best out of these methods, and you can see on our bottom column we looked at what was the average movement. So this gives us a relative measure of how far off are we in terms of how fast the driver is actually moving. So really only XGBoost linear regression performed well, but you can see that we could maybe do up to about 4 hour in advanced prediction, but not 12 hours using these methods. I'm only going to say a little bit about our second experiments, but mostly to say that we really didn't have enough data to do deep learning. That was our main conclusion here. First, using these kind of deep learning models, LSTMs, it's actually very difficult to predict both the X and Y coordinates together. So what we did is we trained two short-term memory models, one to predict X position, one to predict Y, and combine the results. Because deep learning needs a lot more data to see what's going on, we used the 9 previous positions. So that means that we naturally restricted ourselves to drifters that were seen for a long time, and that reduced the amount of data we had available. As well, for these kinds of models, we needed to do more extensive normalization of the data, converting all of our data values to normalized coordinates between -1 and +1. So for that reason, looking at the absolute error terms on this slide, you cannot compare them to the previous slide. So instead, compare these average change values, which are similar to what we saw before, and you can see that even after a lot of work, most of our time spent forming the data properly and doing a lot of experiments, there was a lot of error in these. So we need to do a lot more. One thing I'll say is we did not get a chance to add things like velocity or other parameters into this data, so that remains for future work. In conclusion, data processing framing for drifter position is a challenge. Absolute position is hard, relative positions are easier, so adding in features like velocity or moving average to try to predict where we're relatively going worked much better. However, we really didn't have a lot of data, and it doesn't mean we didn't have a lot of data in total, but we didn't have much data for any one drifter. Often these were seen for maybe a few days, up to a month for some of the longer drifting drifters. And these models really work best when we have a lot of data for one object, not a small amount of data for lots of different objects. So our basic models like linear regression perform the best, and we need to really look to what are some other kinds of models we could apply if we're going to use deep learning for this problem. But basic machine learning methods did work quite well. In the future, we'd like to add in data like wind, temperature, waves, those vectors of where we expect things to go, like we use in numerical models, add velocity moving average to the LSTM tests, and then finally compare these to numerical models. Thank you very much.